The start of the space race. Americans who happened to be gazing at the stars on Friday, October 4, 1957, may have noticed an object crossing the evening sky. Radio listeners, too, may have heard beep, beep, beep coming from their radios. An important event had occurred in the Soviet Union. The Soviets had launched an artificial satellite into orbit around Earth. The satellite was named Sputnik, Russian for traveling companion. It sent the beeping radio signals as it orbited the globe. Rather than celebrating this historic scientific feat, Americans reacted with fear. Sputnik had been launched using a missile capable of traveling a great distance. This terrified Americans. It was widely believed that if the Soviets could launch a satellite into space, they probably could launch nuclear missiles capable of reaching U.S. shores. United States relations were tense with the Soviet Union, which was an empire made up of Russia and several other countries under its control. It was the time of the Cold War. The US and Soviet Union were competing to be the most powerful country on Earth. It was not an actual war, more of a war of threats, but it almost became a war. Americans feared Cold War attacks. Many prepared for a Soviet attack with bomb shelters and duck and cover drills in school where kids would quickly hide under their desks to prepare for a possible nuclear bomb attack. Thousands rushed to stores to purchase bomb shelter kits. Congress created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration (NASA) and set aside money for science education. The successful Sputnik launch shocked the United States. Americans had hoped that the United States would accomplish this scientific achievement first. The Soviets' success fed fears that the U.S. military had generally fallen behind in developing new technology. As a result, the launch of Sputnik served to intensify the Cold War. During the 1950s, both the United States and the Soviet Union were working to develop new technology. Near the end of the Second World War, Nazi Germany had been close to developing the world's first missile capable of traveling thousands of miles. German scientists aided research in both countries after that war ended. Russia, U.S. raced to test rockets. Russia and the United States were also developing satellites. During the 1950s, the United States tested several varieties of rockets and missiles. All of these tests ended in failure. The launch of Sputnik was part of a series of Soviet technological successes. At 184 pounds, the Soviet satellite was much heavier than anything the United States was developing at the time. Soon afterward, the Soviet Union launched 2 more satellites. One carried a dog into space. Together, these orbited Earth every 90 minutes. They created fear that the United States lagged far behind in technology. These concerns grew when the Soviet Union tested a long-distance missile that same year. President Dwight Eisenhower had tried to downplay the importance of the Sputnik launch to the American people. Meanwhile, he poured money into the space program in an effort to catch up. Congress created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration (NASA). The United States suffered a severe setback in December of 1957. Its first artificial satellite exploded on the launch pad. The explosion reminded the country how far behind the Soviet military it was. Sputnik pushes weapons programs. At last, on January 31, 1958, the United States succeeded in launching its first satellite, the Explorer. The Explorer was smaller than Sputnik. It went deeper into space, however. The Soviets responded with yet another launch. The space race continued. The success of Sputnik had a major effect on the Cold War. Fearing the country had fallen behind, the United States sped up its space and weapons programs. In the late 1950s, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev boasted about Soviet technological superiority and the weapons it had developed, which the US assumed were aimed at it. The United States worked to develop its own weapons to counter. In this way, the launch of Sputnik fueled both the space race and the arms race. When John F. Kennedy became president in 1961, the United States fell further behind. The Soviets had already placed a dog in space. Now in Kennedy's first year, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to orbit the Earth. Kennedy challenged the American people and government to put a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s. Congress responded enthusiastically. It set aside billions of dollars for the effort. While Kennedy was president, Alan Shepard became the first American to enter space. Then John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth. In 1969, many thought of President Kennedy's challenge when Neil Armstrong became the first human being to set foot on the moon.
Question 1. What is most likely the reason why the author included this story about Americans' reaction to Sputnik? To show that the Soviet Union was the most advanced nation on Earth. To show that Soviet technology made many Americans fearful. To highlight the rapid advancement of military weapons. To highlight the importance of satellites in modern technology. Question 2. What effect did President Kennedy have on the space race? He defeated the Soviet Union in terms of military power and scientific knowledge. He had a tense relationship with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. He funded the programs that would eventually put an American on the moon. He sought the development of more ICBMs to destroy Soviet spacecrafts. Question number 3. Read the quote from the section, Russia, U.S. race to test rockets. Meanwhile, he poured money into the space program in an effort to catch up. Which sentence uses poured in the same way as the sentence above? His school poured resources into its sports team. The waiter poured water into the glass without missing a drop. The rain poured down from the dark clouds. After the ball hit her face, blood poured from her nose. Which sentence uses poured in the same way as the sentence above? Meanwhile, he poured money into the space program in an effort to catch up. Which one uses poured the same way? The school poured resources into its sports team. The waiter poured water into the glass without missing a drop. The rain poured down from the dark clouds. After the ball hit her face, blood poured from her nose. Context about the video. At the end of World War II, the atomic bomb was introduced as a new weapon. This was an information video that was made and shared with the public in the 1950s during the Cold War. This video was used to help inform the public about how to be safe during a nuclear war. The Cold War was a competition war between the United States and the Soviet Union, or modern-day Russia. This war lasted for nearly 40 years and didn't officially end until the early 90s. This link will take you to the video. If you are struggling to find or access this video, you can access the video at YouTube by typing in duck and cover into the search bar. Question number 4. Directions. Use the reading and duck and cover video to help you answer the prompt below. Make sure that your response has 3 to 4 complete sentences. In your response, you should have a claim, one piece of evidence, and explanation. Use the rubric below to help you form your response. I am successful because I Sentence structure. Did you write a specific claim that answers the question in complete sentences? And content. The information provided is all accurate and relevant to answering all parts of the question. There are 2 points possible, 1 point for each. I am successful because I wrote a specific claim that answers the question in complete sentences, and the information provided is all accurate and relevant to answering all parts of the question. Context about the question. Even though we do not practice duck and cover anymore like they did during the Cold War, we can still compare and contrast the duck and cover video to an emergency that is relevant to us today. What is something that you practice for today in case of emergency? Be specific in your writing and describe what you do in order to prepare for that emergency. So what is something that we practice today for emergencies that's similar to the duck and cover video and how they respond to that emergency? Be specific in your writing and describe what you do in order to prepare for that emergency.